It's a mystery that has baffled historians and explorers for 2,000 years. A mystery that has driven them searching so far back in time, reality merges into myth. But now, on a desolate plain in the high Andes, a journey has begun, whose destination could rewrite ancient history. For hidden within these silent monuments are messages from the past. Clues that may be casting new light on that most sought after of secrets. The location of the lost city of Atlantis. The tragic story of the golden city of Atlantis is said to have first been whispered among the pyramids of Egypt. Priests in the land of the pharaohs told a visiting Greek statesman called Solon about a mighty city that was suddenly and violently destroyed, leaving behind no trace of its existence. No one would ever have known about Atlantis had it not been for Solon's distant descendant, the famous Greek philosopher Plato, who lived in the 4th century BC. Saying that the precious information had been handed down to him through generations of Greeks, Plato recorded the strange tale of Atlantis in one of his classic works. According to Plato's writings, there was once a city of unimaginable wealth and power, situated at the edge of a fair and highly fertile plain on a vast island. The city ruled over a glorious empire which had flourished more than 9,000 years earlier. The city, Plato wrote, was called Atlantis, and it was so fantastically rich, its walls were covered in gold and precious metals. Lying within a complex system of canals, it possessed a huge trading network and awesome military strength. But after the kings of Atlantis had ruled for many generations, the island on which their city lay was suddenly destroyed in a violent cataclysm. In a single dreadful night, it was swallowed up by the sea and vanished. It's an extraordinary story, but is it true? As one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Plato is perhaps best known for his attempts to describe an ideal society, the perfect world as he saw it. So he could have dreamt up the story of Atlantis to get across these ideas. But Plato repeatedly emphasizes that the story of Atlantis is true. What's more, he maps out the geography and architecture of the metropolis at length in a way which seems concrete and real.
He describes it in such detail that it looks much more like a travelogue, a guidebook to some foreign country. That suggests that it's a real place. Somewhere, at some time, but a real place, and we could go and look for it.
Certainly many have been convinced that Atlantis was a real place. And so, from the first age of exploration to the present day, the search for the lost city has become the ceaseless obsession of historians and treasure hunters. One of the earliest sites to inspire Atlantis seekers was the Greek island of Thera in the eastern Mediterranean. Peaceful enough now, Its dark rocks bear witness to a terrifying natural disaster. Some 3,500 years ago, people were forced to run for their lives as a volcano exploded with extraordinary violence.
It ejected enormous masses of volcanic material, which not only covered the entire island of Thera, but spread all over the eastern Mediterranean. The eruption of the volcano of Thera was the biggest in history.
Here, thought many, was an event that strongly echoed Plato's description of the catastrophic end of Atlantis. Further evidence dramatically came to light in 1967, when archaeologists uncovered an entire abandoned town on Thera. It had lain hidden for centuries under layers of solidified volcanic ash. Excavation revealed that the people who lived here had once been part of the great Minoan culture. A major power in the Mediterranean, the Minoans, like the Atlanteans, were wealthy and sophisticated, their plush homes adorned with ornate frescoes.
It is true that the standard of civilization we reveal in these ruins is exactly, or almost exactly, what Plato describes for Atlantis.
But something not exactly as described is the dating of Thera. Plato said it was 9,000 years before the time of his ancestor Solon that Atlantis was destroyed. Yet it was only around 900 years before then that the Minoan town was buried under red-hot ash. It's been argued, though, that the figure of 9,000 must be a mistake. Since Egyptian history didn't go back nearly that far, it could be an error introduced as the story was handed down from Egyptians to Greeks. So Thera need not be ruled out.
All these similarities, the volcanic eruption, the type of society, the standard of civilization, led many people to be convinced that Thera is Atlantis.
But despite its attractions, dates are not the only difficulty with Thera. For it was only one small colony of the much larger Minoan civilization. Yet in Plato's tale, it is the entire empire of Atlantis which disappears.
Thera was not the center of the Minoan civilization. The center was in Crete, 70 miles away from here. But Crete was not affected by the eruption.
There are still many who believe that it was here that Atlantis met its tragic end. But doubts about Thera have led others to take the quest for the lost city elsewhere. And it is at a place of heroes and legends, a place that was for centuries itself thought to be no more than a fantasy, that a more recent theory about Atlantis has arisen. The mighty city of Troy was once thought by many to be an invention of the Greek poet Homer in his epic stories of the Trojan Wars. But with the discovery of this Bronze Age site in Turkey, the famous city of Troy was transformed from myth into solid stone. Of the many experts who have flocked to investigate the remains of Troy, one, a geoarchaeologist called Dr. Eberhard Zanger, came up with a startling idea. Could the discovery of Troy have also ended the search for Atlantis? Could the two legendary cities be one and the same? Troy had not sunk into the sea or been destroyed overnight. But Zanger's research uncovered many striking parallels with Atlantis in the city's landscape and architecture. Some experts are convinced Zanger is right.
Zanger's idea that Troy and Atlantis might be the same thing is new, it is very original, and it's very exciting. The strength of his theory is that so many features of Atlantis seem to be possibly or probably present in the region of Troy.
For example, Atlantis was said to be situated on a mountain rising from an exceptionally beautiful and fertile plain. And indeed, the city of Troy looks out from its fortified hill across a wide expanse of plain below. And that's not all. Troy is only a few kilometers from the coast. Zanger argued that a series of old rivers and man-made cuts discovered on the plain could once have been canals joining the city to the sea, just as described in Atlantis.
I think that we have here an idea about where Atlantis might be that we cannot afford not to follow up.
But some other archaeologists have dismissed this daring theory. Donald Easton claims that the features Zanger identified are not really there at all.
I think the theory is superficially plausible, but as soon as you look into it, it all collapses, and I don't think there's any truth in the idea that Troy can be Atlantis.
Were these man-made cuts really canals? Could they, as in Plato's description of Atlantis, have ever carried ships into the heart of the city?
It's a wonderful idea. I would just love to think of Bronze Age ships sailing up this cutting here with their sails spread out. It would be a wonderful sight. There's just one problem about it, and that is that this cutting has never been lower than 11 meters above sea level, and it's therefore completely impossible that ships could have sailed up here from the sea.
But Professor Van Andel argues that the land at the coast has been actively rising, so that 3,000 years ago, in the time of Troy, the canals would have been much lower, low enough to connect to the sea.
I find it very difficult to imagine why anyone should put all this effort in digging two canals from the plain to the coast that never reached sea level. What would the purpose possibly have been?
But what about the Trojan plain? Is it really identical to the vast plain on which Atlantis was set?
Atlantis's plain, to judge from the measurements, should be 200,000 square kilometers in size. The Trojan plain is 4,000 times smaller than that.
Zanger pointed out that exaggerated dimensions are common in classical texts. He and his supporters have argued for more excavation to confirm his theory. They have been encouraged by the fact that the theory has enabled Zanger to make predictions about what might be discovered at the site. For example, he predicted that if Troy was Atlantis, it would turn out to be much larger. 2 years ago, trenches were detected underground far beyond what had been thought to be the limits of the city.
I regard the Troy theory as a very important one. And it seems to me that we should set aside our differences of opinion of how true or not true it might be and go and give it the study that it deserves.
But despite its importance, the Troy theory has not succeeded in quenching the thirst of Atlantis seekers. For according to some of them, Plato actually gave us clear information on where to find the golden ruins of Atlantis. and he was pointing thousands of miles in the opposite direction. When Plato bequeathed his mysterious tale of the lost city to history, he did not forget to say where Atlantis was. He said that it had been situated on an island the size of Libya and Asia put together, which lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules and in the Atlantic Ocean. The Pillars of Hercules was the name the Greeks commonly used for the Straits of Gibraltar, at the mouth of the Mediterranean, while they used the name Atlantic Ocean exactly as we do today. So if Atlantis was on a vast island in the Atlantic Ocean, neither Thera, nor Troy, nor any site in the Mediterranean could possibly qualify. But, their supporters say, Plato's location shouldn't be taken literally. After all, the Egyptians, from whom the information was supposed to have come, had not sailed across the Atlantic. The Mediterranean, the area they were familiar with, must be a much more likely location for Atlantis. But though there was opportunity for error as the story was passed down through the centuries, it has not been agreed that the location Plato gave is a mistranslation or misunderstanding.
The description is very clear. Atlantis is beyond the Straits of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean, and therefore no site in the Mediterranean is going to qualify.
And when Plato told us the empire was called Atlantis, this was perhaps a significant clue in itself. It's no accident that the words Atlantis and Atlantic sound the same. They are both derived from the very same root, Atlas, one of the most important Greek gods, whose name was often used to denote lands to the west. When 15th century explorers sailed west across the Atlantic and found a vast island, the Americas, some of them were struck by the idea that this could be the land of Atlantis. The notion was later dismissed, but now some people are asking whether perhaps the early explorers were right.
Plato's description that beyond the Pillars of Hercules there is a huge island, which is the size of 2 continents, can only be met by the Americas. There can't be anything else whatever.
Modern geological science has revealed that even the most violent natural phenomena cannot cause an island to sink overnight, while something the size of a continent can never sink into the sea. Despite continued claims that Atlantis could be on a sunken land under the ocean, geology implies that Plato's details about the bizarre disappearance of Atlantis cannot be accurate. And so, an idea about Atlantis has now been born. An idea which could overturn many of our beliefs about the ancient world. An idea which suggests that when Plato told us of a lost city, he was talking of a place thousands of miles away on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. And now, with a remarkable discovery in Bolivia, comes further support for this idea, once thought to be beyond the realms of possibility, that Atlantis may have been a city in the immense landmass of the Americas. Many thousands of feet above sea level, in the wilderness of the Bolivian high plain, there lies a mysterious collection of ruins. When the Spanish conquistadors first set eyes on the huge monuments here, they assumed them to be an abandoned temple, nothing remotely on the scale of Atlantis. But as clues left by an ancient people gradually emerge from the dust, the true significance of the site is becoming clearer. The Aymara people are American Indians who have lived for thousands of years in the southern Andes. Long ago, their distant ancestors built monumental structures at a place called Tiwanaku that they are now helping to excavate. One of the leaders of the team is archaeologist Professor Alan Colata of the University of Chicago.
When the first explorers and archaeologists came to Tiwanaku over 100 years ago, they considered all of this simply to be a collection of temples. But our excavations now tell us a very different story indeed. This is not simply a collection of temples, it's in fact an enormous city. We now know it's over 6 square kilometers, and the population reached at least 50,000.
Could these be the actual walls of the legendary city of Atlantis? How much does the lost civilization of Tiwanaku have in common with Plato's famous tale? As we know, Atlantis was set in a highly fertile plain of enormous dimensions. Tiwanaku lies on the Bolivian Altiplano, a vast plateau between the Andes, which is far beyond the scale of anything in the Mediterranean. The Altiplano is now relatively poor agricultural land, but in the time of Tiwanaku, farmers had a special system of raised fields, which made the earth over 10 times more productive than it is today. Just as in the land of Atlantis, it was the abundance of food which made the region prosperous and allowed a large city to emerge. This temple was just one of several at the center of a bustling metropolis, which included royal palaces, urban gardens, and manufacturing districts. And in another echo of Atlantis, the inner core of the city was reserved for the ruling elite. Today, only a fraction of the city is visible, but excavations have revealed that many of the structures were built with massive stone blocks brought from quarries many kilometers away. Alan Colata, together with a team from the Bolivian Institute of Archaeology, has revealed that the methods of construction, like these clamps made with molten copper, were highly sophisticated. These kind of technologies allowed the Tiwanakans to build the most impressive structure of all, the giant Acapana mound, 17 meters high and 200 meters long. It may look like a natural hill, but excavations have established that under the earth is a pyramid with 7 stepped terraces. So there's no question that Tiwanaku was a great metropolis. And its parallels with Atlantis do not end there. Plato said the lost city was so fantastically rich, its walls were clad in gold. A touch of artistic license, perhaps. But careful sifting of the remains at Tiwanaku has thrown up an unexpected discovery.
We now know that Tiwanaku was an extraordinarily wealthy city. We've discovered that the palaces and temples of the city were literally clad in gold. We found a series of gold pins drilled into the facades of these structures where the bands would have been attached. So when you looked at Tiwanaku's temples and palaces, you did not see bare stone. You saw literally a city shimmering in light, reflected from the gold facades.
Sadly, after centuries of looting, only a few artifacts of gold remain. Like this miniature mask found in a burial chamber. The unprecedented wealth of Atlantis came about for a very specific reason. Its position as a center of trade. And now, in another parallel with the lost city, it's turned out that Tiwanaku was also just such a center. People still come today from far and wide, even from across the border with Peru, carrying their goods to the market here. The trade network of Tiwanaku operated differently. People didn't buy and sell freely as they do today. All transactions were controlled by the kings of Tiwanaku in a kind of state monopoly. But many of the products, food, textiles and ceramics, would have been the same. The immense trading activity around Tiwanaku was made possible by a very special form of transport. Cousins of the camel, llamas are still invaluable today in the rough Andean terrain. Experts believe that in the time of Tiwanaku, huge llama trains would have been continuously crisscrossing the Altiplano, carrying goods to and from the great metropolis.
We know that upwards of 2, 3, perhaps even as many as 5,000 animals were loaded up with a wide range of commodities, from brilliant textiles to gold to silver, to more ordinary goods such as blocks of salt and foodstuffs. A staggering quantity of goods came into and flowed out of Tiwanaku. We know that Tiwanaku was the major trading center for the southern Andes.
So the discoveries at Tiwanaku show it was indeed a vastly wealthy city and a center of trade. But Atlantis was also a great military power with a huge standing army. Did the rulers of Tiwanaku, like the Atlanteans, have the power to invade, conquer, and dominate? Here, a warrior, depicted with a puma's face, holds a trophy, the severed head of his enemy. Piecing together evidence from art such as this, it has become apparent that Tiwanaku was indeed a military force to be reckoned with.
Tiwanaku's kings were warlords. We know that at some point in its history, the city's kings conquered the entire Titicaca Basin of Peru and Bolivia, and then began to set up garrisons on the coast of Peru and Chile and as far south as northern Argentina. They also began to colonize this vast territory. So in fact, Tiwanaku was a great military power.
But military might wasn't the only reason the kings of Atlantis were able to rule over a large area. They were also divine and born of gods. Did the kings of Tiwanaku have such godlike status? The religion of Tiwanaku was so powerful that traces of its ceremonies can still be found in the Aymara culture. The burning of offerings to Pachamama, or Mother Earth, remains an essential part of digs at the site, even today. The Gateway of the Sun is a potent symbol of the city's religious importance, and it is thought to be a calendar. With the secret knowledge of when to reap and when to sow that the calendar gave them, the kings of Tiwanaku became a divine link between the gods and humans. Armed with this magical power, they were able to export their religion throughout the region.
What in fact the kings of Tiwanaku were exporting with their religious ideas was an immensely powerful and influential state ideology. This ideology dominated a broad region of the southern and central Andes, and it was the power of religious ideas, in fact, rather than military force or coercion, that permitted the kings of Tiwanaku to extend their dynasty for over 500 years.
Just like the kings of Atlantis, with their godlike status, the ruling dynasty of Tiwanaku were able to pass their sacred power from generation to generation. Tiwanaku is not far from the shores of Lake Titicaca, and the area around the lake was its main sphere of influence. But its religious imagery and evidence of its colonies have been found as far away as coastal Chile, Peru, and northern Argentina.
Tiwanaku was not merely a collection of temples or even simply a large city. It was an immensely powerful empire that dominated the Andean region.
Tiwanaku has many parallels with Atlantis. Its wealth, its power, its walls of gold, its military might, the fact that it was an empire. It's tempting, therefore, to think that these could be the actual remains of the lost city of Atlantis. But the archaeological evidence reveals a crucial problem. Although Tiwanaku was first occupied long before Plato wrote his story, it did not become an empire until hundreds of years after his death. So, according to Professor Colata, the ruined city excavated here cannot itself be Atlantis. But there's always the possibility that Tiwanaku could have been born from the ashes of an earlier civilization based nearby, which has not yet been discovered. The existence of an earlier culture here would be made more likely if there was evidence of civilized communities springing up elsewhere in the Americas, long before Tiwanaku. In the tropical jungle of Mexico, a people called the Olmec once undertook an immense effort of human endeavor. With a labor force of 80,000 people working for an estimated 11 million man-hours, they beat back the foliage to create a great settlement raised out of the jungle on earthworks.
Bueno, señores, ya llegamos, vamos a trabajar. Hay que tumbar este monte.
Today, it's archaeologists like Anne Cyphers of the University of Mexico who are again digging and clearing at the San Lorenzo site in order to undertake the biggest ever excavation of Olmec culture. It's an enormous task because the area that the Olmec made into their settlement is a mound spread over several kilometers, most of which is hidden beneath dense vegetation. But one thing is already clear, the great age of the site.
The Olmec culture at San Lorenzo dates to 3,000 years ago, maybe a bit earlier. Prior to that fluorescence that occurred about 3,000 years ago, there were pre-existing cultures here. And out of those native cultures the Olmec developed.
The Olmec flourished over 1,000 years before Plato wrote down the Atlantis story. And as well as being of great antiquity, the Olmec clearly represent evidence of civilization. Although the tropical climate has destroyed much of what they built, research is revealing that the Olmec undoubtedly deserve that description. They created a striking and complex art style, building these colossal 2-meter-high statues. The Olmec rulers had all the trappings of a major civilization: a massive organized labor force, proto-cities, a complex class system, and a wide sphere of influence in the region.
I think as time goes on and research continues, each day it becomes more and more surprising how sophisticated the Olmec culture really was.
So we know now that civilization had begun in the Americas by the time of the proposed dates for Atlantis. But still, the mystery is not yet solved, nor the story finished. For there is a simple and obvious objection to the Americas theory. How could the Egyptians or the Greeks have known about America? It was not until the age of Columbus, 2,000 years later, that contacts between Europe and America became commonplace, making it an apparently impossible location for the lost city. But there are those who argue that we've been blinded by our ideas of history. They claim the Olmec left a clue. A clue about visitors from across the Atlantic long before Columbus. Why, they ask, do the faces of the Olmec colossal heads apparently not resemble natives of Central America? Professor Genoves is an anthropologist who believes that the Olmec colossal heads look like portraits of Africans.
Some of these facial features certainly show evidence of a link with Negroid groups, or at least what we associate with such groups. Looking at characteristics like those we see here, we can see they are not typical of South America. Just as white people are not native to most of Africa, there were no black people in South America. It seems strange to us when we see them, and so we have to ask, what's going on?
Could the Olmec heads depict African visitors from across the Atlantic? Other archaeologists think it's more likely the statues are actually of Olmec kings, but they are heavily stylized.
There are a number of theories regarding the colossal heads. I think that the most significant interpretation regarding them is that they are the portraits of rulers.
But what of the appearance in Olmec art of bearded figures? Another oddity, since American Indians in this region genetically do not have beards. Perhaps these are also depictions of foreigners, or perhaps people did have beards in the past. Again, there is disagreement.
The beards that we see on figures in Olmec art are interesting because in general the native populations here in Mesoamerica do not have a lot of facial hair, but that's talking about the people today. We don't know if that applies in the past.
Cuando vemos una figura
When we see a bearded figure, or one with negroid features, it is difficult to accept that it could be a pure invention, yet be so accurate. So, if these features don't belong on this side of the Atlantic, where could they possibly have come from? Well, the answer is from the other side of the Atlantic.
Whatever the truth behind the mystery of the Olmec statues, it has been shown that early transatlantic travel was at least technically possible. Professor Genovese proved it himself over 20 years ago, when he crossed the ocean on a primitive reed boat as one of the crew accompanying anthropologist Thor Heyerdahl on the now historic Ra voyages. Added to the discovery of Viking and Roman artifacts in the Americas, the professor thinks there is now good evidence for early transatlantic travel.
We have evidence from morphology, archaeology, ethnology, ethnography, linguistics, genetics, and even possibly from botany. Well, it adds up to a lot of evidence.
If there was evidence of people reaching America thousands of years before Columbus, this could only have given rise back in Egypt to the story of Atlantis if some of them had managed to get back, a more difficult journey. But there is another, even more surprising possible origin for Atlantis. Could American Indians have sailed east across the Atlantic Ocean and discovered Europe, taking stories of their civilizations with them? Some people think so.
I think it's highly probable that some American Indians traveled eastbound across the Atlantic as long as they were on the Gulf Stream. So anybody from the Caribbean up along the American coast to the Canadian-US border, where the Gulf Stream then starts swinging directly east, could have followed that moving river in the ocean. And there's no reason why they should not have landed in Europe.
People from the earliest American civilizations, those in Central and South America, could only pick up the Gulf Stream if they could get as far as the Caribbean. The Caribbean islands are nearly 1,000 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, where the Olmec lived. We know the Olmec certainly used boats and rafts to move stone and other goods around their territory in a substantial river trading system. The rivers they journeyed down flow straight out into the Gulf of Mexico. As this statue of a shark eating a man shows, they are known to have used the coastal areas for fishing and transport. But there is no direct evidence that they ventured out any further.
There's no evidence that the Olmec navigated the oceans. In other words, that they were able to make contact with other continents or other areas at a great distance.
On the other hand, the Olmec's immediate successors in the region, the Maya, had managed to sail from Mexico to the Caribbean by the time Columbus arrived there. Their boats, said to be as large as Columbus's own, have not survived, but the record of their existence has.
On Columbus's fourth voyage, as he sailed into the southern Caribbean, he saw, and noted in his journal, a Mayan trading vessel. So there was an ongoing commercial activity in the Caribbean at the time that Columbus met them, and a great deal of archaeological evidence that this goes back for many centuries. This is absolute proof of the degree to which some American Indian nations were seafaring.
The exact sailing capacities of earlier American civilizations are still in doubt, but it looks as though they may well have been underestimated. After all, when Thor Heyerdahl wanted to build a reed boat seaworthy enough to cross the Atlantic, it was to the fishermen of Lake Titicaca that he came for the answer. Here, in the region of Tiwanaku, were the only people who still had the necessary skills. The extent of ancient contacts across the oceans is a lost part of history. But there are mysterious links suggesting they could in fact have been quite common. One such link is connected to the culture of Tiwanaku itself. The kings of Tiwanaku, like the pharaohs of Egypt, were mummified after death. That both cultures practice mummification might just be a coincidence. But another startling new link between these two great empires has been discovered, which cannot be called a coincidence. In the market at Tiwanaku town, the Aymara women are doing brisk business selling coca leaves. Chewing the leaves releases the cocaine contained within them, and this use of coca has always been a vital part of religion and culture in the Andes. In fact, chewing coca was a habit of the kings of Tiwanaku. Statues often show them with a lump of leaves in their cheek. But given that the coca plant is only found in South America, without transatlantic travel, it would be inexplicable to find it being used in other continents thousands of years ago. Yet recently, chemists carrying out tests on Egyptian mummies have found molecules of cocaine in the bodies, along with nicotine, perhaps from tobacco, another American plant. Since the mummies spanned a period of 1,000 years, this discovery could suggest frequent trade and contact with the Americas.
The recent detection in Egyptian mummies of cocaine is an additional piece of evidence of this transoceanic trade, because coca is indigenous to America, so somebody must have been bringing it across.
So despite what we've been taught in school, early transatlantic travel is a possibility. One that could solve the mystery of Plato's lost island continent. A continent that may in fact have been there all the time. America.
People have thought that Plato's description of Atlantis made no sense. Once people understand that Egyptians and Greeks knew very well about America, then everything else follows, and it all makes perfectly good sense.
With transoceanic contact, with great empires and with civilization in the right time frame, we can imagine that the remains of the lost city of Atlantis lie somewhere in the Americas. Lake Titicaca, of such importance to the Tiwanaku Empire, is one of the deepest lakes in the world, and it has barely been explored. But what divers have discovered are artifacts from the Tiwanaku period, including stone boxes with offerings to the gods. The Tiwanakans put them there because they believed that life began in the lake. Perhaps there was more to this belief than a simple religious myth. Perhaps it's a story about an earlier culture now submerged. Could it be that beneath the surface of Lake Titicaca there lies the lost city of Atlantis? It's not unreasonable to dream it could be lying there, waiting to be discovered. Some people say Atlantis is just a dream, and that this is why lost civilizations everywhere have echoes of the legendary empire. Yet none is a perfect match. If so, it's one of humankind's most powerful dreams.
The search for Atlantis will never end, because Atlantis is within us. Everybody needs to dream of an ideal place, needs to dream of a paradise, and that's what Atlantis is.
But if it is a dream, the story of Atlantis is also solid and real enough to keep us searching on, in the hope that one day it might be found.